Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Finding Me in the ITV networks. I would like to go to a very short clip to introduce my guest to all of your viewers so that you can understand and perhaps get an idea of the dynamic personality that is with me today and appreciate the conversation that we have thereafter. And when we come back into the studio, I would like to welcome Ms. Shiva and engage with her. So I'll see you after the video clip.
To deal with this, it was called a Korean company, POSCO. When we went into the details, it's owned by Wall Street. It's owned by Mr. Buffett, who comes to try and teach us in India how to give, and we wrote an open letter to him saying, Mr. Buffett, stop grabbing first. Then
Warren
teach us.
Buffett was there with the Gates and with others talking to Indian investors about how to encourage investment in their country.
Absolutely. And of course, countries like India are seen as the place for investment, whether it be Walmart, whom we've stopped so far from having its retail outlets, or the Cargills who would like to totally control the food economy of 1.2 billion people. We might be poor, but we still have to eat. And what could be a more secure market than getting the basics? We stopped the privatization of Delhi's water supply, where again corporations wanted to sell us our own water back to us at 10 times the price. So no matter which direction you look, the corporations are trying to appropriate people's economies, destroy democracy, because which democracy would say, take away our seeds, give us more nuclear, give us more toxics? These are illusions that are being marketed in order for people to hand over the power to decide what we eat to a handful of corporations. This is not being done to improve the food supply or improve nutrition. It's being done to control food, because without genetic engineering, companies could not have patented seed. A seed patent means the right to exclude anyone from making, using, saving, developing the patented product. If it's a machine, it doesn't matter. If it's an aeroplane, it doesn't matter. Boeing makes aeroplane, a local citizen does not. But when it comes to seed, if Monsanto gets a patent right to seed, then a farmer saving seed is treated like a thief, an intellectual property thief. A farmer whose field is contaminated by a genetically engineered seed that Monsanto has sold through pollination or wind, that farmer who is a victim of pollution is also treated like a thief, because when seed becomes intellectual property, the existence of the genetically engineered traits anywhere without the patent holder's permission is treated like theft.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome. I'm sure you thoroughly appreciated that, and because it's a conversation that's not often heard in mainstream media, and such discussions are often not shared with us. So Ms. Shiva, I would like to say thank you very much for being here, for making this time for me. I mean, it's a great opportunity and honor to have you here.
Pleasure.
Okay, you are fondly known for placing women and ecology at the heart of modern development discourse. And initially, I know you were trained as a physicist. Then you shifted your focus to interdisciplinary research. And then you looked at science, technology, environmental policy, and today you're known as a gender and an environmental activist. Okay, so placing women and ecology in the heart of modern development, why was that necessary, and in what angle are you focused on?
Well, women and ecology are at the heart of everything that sustains us. If there wasn't an earth, we wouldn't be alive. If women didn't work as hard as they do, nobody would be getting food, nobody getting clothes, nobody would be getting clean, children wouldn't be looked after, old people wouldn't be looked after. I realized as I started to work more and more on ecological questions and got involved with this beautiful movement that started in my region, in the Himalaya, where women said, we're going to hug the trees. You'll have to kill us before you kill the trees.
Wow.
And this was in the 70s, 40 years ago. Okay. I was a student, but I became a volunteer because I came from this area. I had personally witnessed the disappearance of our forests. My father had been a forest conservator, and I trekked those forests and they were disappearing. So as a volunteer, I helped the movement mainly in writing, because the women were totally knowledgeable,
Okay.
but they didn't write.
Okay.
So I became their
A script,
translator, their writer, their promoter. And the deeper I got into issues, I realized we had a development discourse which totally left nature and women out, even though they carried the world. Development and growth measure what is commodified, what is sold, what is in the global marketplace. And in the definition of growth, if you produce what you consume, you don't produce.
That's right.
And on the basis of growth, women don't work. On the basis of growth, nature is dead. And our paradigm of reductionist Cartesian science has reinforced this idea of women don't work, nature is dead. And nature for me is very much alive, and women work harder than anyone else.
And women are perhaps the most alive.
And the most
aspect,
alive, the
yeah.
most intelligent.
Yes.
The most productive. So all the patriarchal categories, all the capitalist patriarchal categories, structures, paradigms, were so blind that I wrote Staying Alive, my first book,
Yes.
centered on women and ecology.
Yes, I know. I want to come back to that particular book because, I mean, Staying Alive has been acclaimed as one of the best books, and I think it launched you into the market. That was in 2002, right?
No,
to the-
I started to write it
Oh, 1989.
1989.
Yes,
right.
yes. It had.
2002 would have been a new edition by a
Right.
new publisher, yeah.
Okay, and sorry, but in 2003 you were identified by Time magazine as the environmental hero. So what brought you to that status? Was it because you revived the entire discourse about nature and nature being alive, or combining this dual role of the fact that both women and nature contribute towards development, and then redefining development, of course, because...
Well, I remember the Time magazine cover. It was 2002 because it was written and published for the Earth Summit that took place in Johannesburg.
Right.
And Time magazine had taken on the challenge to identify people who were making a difference to the life of the planet. And they had visited us and visited our farm, Navdanya, of course asked me lots of questions. And at the end of this article on me as an environmental hero, they said the biodiversity-based innovations that Navdanya is carrying out puts a challenge to the biotechnology industry, which claims to feed the world. But here are ecological ways that produce more, don't harm the earth, put women at the center of production, put women's knowledge of diversity at the center of production. And it was that Time article that inspired Monsanto, through its public relations people, to, at a press conference at Johannesburg during the Earth Summit, to give me what they called the bullshit award for starving the world with organic. What I called it the gift of cow dung. I composted it and did exactly what they didn't want promoted, organic farming.
Okay, talking about Monsanto, I'm really curious now because in South Africa, I think we haven't really opened the discourse completely, or maybe academics are afraid to challenge, afraid to be as outspoken as you are. Maybe they have the knowledge, but I always maintain that in social sciences there is very much a limitation to the kind of research that you get because it's biased, it's controlled by who does the funding, which think tanks you work for, etc. And so I have heard very often, and I mean, I challenge my children because they in the science field. One did food science as well, and I kept on saying, but there's a problem with genetically modified foods or genetically engineered foods. She said, no, mummy, but in the lectures they said it's more resistant, it's better, it will allow for more food growth, more crops, etc. So what is the story on genetically modified or genetically engineered seeds or products of food?
Well, on the issue of genetic engineering and South Africa, I want to mention that when Ila Gandhi was a member of parliament, she had organized a special meeting for me to come to the South African parliament to discuss this issue because it was a very intense debate.
Yes.
And then, of course, suddenly the approvals were given by forces that are totally invisible. Yes. Now, what's the problem with genetic engineering? My background is I was trained as a physicist. I did an interdisciplinary PhD thesis on the foundations of quantum theory, especially the fact that you can't separate things. They're all interconnected.
Right.
Quantum theory tells us that. Ecology tells us that. And yet we have in genetic engineering the continuation of an obsolete model that everything is fragmented, everything is immutable particles. You can just put them together like a Lego set, and you're going to have miracles. The paradigm is wrong. That's the first. Second is, for the first time, you're taking genes that don't belong to that species and introducing it, which will have consequences.
Yes.
All breeding has been wheat with wheat, corn with corn, humans with humans, cows with bullocks,
Yes.
and bulls. For the first time, you can put viruses into the plant through genetic engineering. You can put bacteria into the plants. They've put human genes into wheat. They've put scorpion genes into cabbage. All kinds of transfers are taking place.
Right.
The two most prevalent applications are Bt genes from bacteria to produce a crop that is supposed to produce its own pesticide and is supposed to be a pest control technology. The other is herbicide-tolerant genes, also are toxic, that's supposed to control weeds. What is the record in the last 20 years globally? There has been no yield increase because the yield comes from the plant into which the toxic gene is introduced.
Right.
It doesn't get introduced
Into the soil.
and the gene doesn't create the yield.
Right.
The plant creates the yield.
Right.
So the yield story is false. This is not a solution to hunger. The chemical story of reduction of toxics is false because in fact chemical use has gone up. And why has it gone up? In the case of herbicide-tolerant crops, it was designed to go up. The same companies that sold the herbicides were now selling seeds tolerant to the herbicide.
Right.
Roundup Ready soya of Monsanto. Sales go up. But as a technology, does it work? No, it doesn't control the weeds. It creates super weeds. Half of America's farmlands are so overtaken by superweeds that they are now having to spray Agent Orange,
Wow.
which was used in
In
the Vietnam War,
yes.
on the fields of the United States, 240. In the case of Bt crops, we've had the longest experience. In India, they came in illegally, had to challenge Monsanto in the Supreme Court of India. They were stopped for a while till they've eventually sorted out the approvals. 95% of the cottonseed commercially sold is controlled and owned by Monsanto. Prices jumped 8,000%. Do the poor peasants of India have that kind of
No
money?
ways.
No. They take credit. Does it work to control pests? No, it's created super pests. It's created new pests. 300% more aphids and jacids. And this is official record. Have the yields gone up? No, they've gone down since Bt. The yields were increasing and now they're going down. The same is the case for Pakistan. The same is the case for Burkina Faso with Bt cotton. Yields did not go up. Farmers get trapped into debt for costly non-renewable seeds, of which 50% of the price originally went as royalty payment,
Wow.
rent collection, straight to Monsanto. And of course, pesticide costs. 13 times more pesticides are being sprayed since the GMOs were introduced. That kind of debt the farmer cannot get out of.
Yeah, and then in the mainstream media, you just hear about suicides by Indian farmers, etc., but you're not
It's
given the story.
284,000 Indian farmers have committed
Wow.
suicide. In my view, the most resilient of human beings, because I've grown up in that society,
Yes.
and I've had so much admiration for our peasants, our women, who will survive the worst crisis and come right back.
Yes.
They never give up, but they are giving up because this kind of extortion, they can't deal with.
Okay, we have to go to a break, and we'll see you after the break. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah, and welcome back to the second segment of Finding Me today with Ms. Vandana Shiva. She spoke about the challenges that ordinary people face from the corporates, and that's why for many of you who've watched previous shows of mine, you can understand that there is no true democracy today, because most of the country's power struggle happens within the corporates, the transnationals. These are the people, the organizations, etc., who actually control the policies, the kind of infrastructure, etc., that is brought into our governments, that is passed for ordinary people to then just maybe perhaps make do with it, and it is not the voice of the people. And Ms. Shiva, as you were speaking about the role of these organizations, Monsanto, transnational corporations, major corporations, etc., who come in and dictate policy, who make sure that through some way or the other they get governments to buy into their particular scheme, if I may call it, because what you've just said now is really not broadcasted in the mainstream media. You don't know about these things, you don't hear about it. You hear farmers are committing suicide because they have debt, and so you think, okay, they're borrowing too much or whatever, or that there was a drought, etc. But there are external circumstances that are feeding into this. So now, how do you challenge this? And I mean, India is such a big country, and there genuinely are very many problems inside of India. And if you look at in terms of environment, your corruption, the caste system, etc., how do you filter through all of these facets and like start changing the mindset and get people to buy into what you're saying and not because India loves power, and I mean, I think ordinary people get caught in, if you look at movies, Bollywood, and how they get caught into this dream life, So will they believe you, or will they believe what they see on the TV screens or from these elites or well-dressed, personalities, etc.?
With two issues. One, Monsanto is not just of relevance to India. It has become the biggest global seed corporation, but it is destroying democracy everywhere. Even in the heart of the United States, it is preventing citizens from knowing what they eat by preventing labeling laws. And Vermont got a labeling law, and they're threatening to sue them. So food democracy is being absolutely throttled for the profits and power of this one
corporation.
How do we deal with the multifaceted problems and threats? I've been going at this for 40 years, and the first inspiration for me is just very deep love for life on earth and the people who all want to have a life.
Yes.
None of them want to have to see a baby die because there was no clean water, or a husband commit suicide because the debt became so much, which needn't have happened. The second thing that keeps me going and inspires me is taking the right action. Because as our ancient Gita says, you do not have control over the results of your action. But what you can decide,
your choice,
is choose the right action. And the right action is, of course, decided by the context, and it's decided by having a conscience that's very alive as a guide and is stronger than all the powers of the external world, which is where you get courage, which is where you get fearlessness. But I believe it is also where you get insights, where you get the wisdom and the anchor to know the right path. So when I realized in '87 how totally the corporations wanted to control our seed and our food through patenting, which means owning the seed, claiming they've created it, and they said we have to do GMOs because that means patent. And I said, okay, GMOs means God move over, because we are now the creator, is what these companies are saying.
Yes.
And I got a chill thinking of how they wanted to replace all of creation, all faith, the creator, all of farmers' innovation, all of women's intelligence, just erase it all for a few years of collecting royalties. How pathetic can that be? So I decided that day I was going to save seeds. And we've created 110 community seed banks.
Wow.
These seed banks allow farmers to have access to their own seed.
But this is only in India, or is it worldwide?
Well, I started in India, but now the inspiration is going worldwide.
Okay, that's fantastic.
And the seed freedom movement,
okay,
which is now very global, has blocked very much the kind of laws that forced apartheid on South Africa. I remember on another 9/11, 1906, Gandhi did his first satyagraha, his first fight for truth. And it was against the compulsory registration on the basis of race. Because the apartheid regime was based on discrimination on the basis of race. And he said, no, we will not be divided. We are one citizenry. We are equal, and we will not wear these badges of identity.
Right.
So So
Similarly, yeah.
these laws are very similar, and he said we will not obey. Gandhi also, inspired by his life here in South Africa, wrote the most amazing book, Hind Swaraj, on the ship from England to South Africa. And that book has been my little gospel. Not because every line is translatable for today, it's more than a century ago, but because he defines real freedom. Real freedom as the right action, as the right livelihood. Real freedom as knowing how to distinguish between oppression and that self-organized responsibility which you need to take. And so we call our seed freedom Beat Swaraj.
Beat Swaraj.
Because Swaraj was the word he used.
Okay.
We call food sovereignty Anna Swaraj.
Okay.
We call our water democracy Jal Swaraj.
Wow.
We call our earth democracy the old word of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. We are all one earth family.
Yes. I know, because when I interviewed Sri Ramchali, as I was telling you, he spoke about this notion of Ubuntu that Africans have but that Indians haven't, and that's exactly what you've just said, that we are all one family. But as you were speaking, I was thinking about your book, Soil, Not Oil, Climate Change, Peak Oil and Food Insecurity. What is the motivation behind this? Because it's the winner of the Right Livelihood Award, 1993, things like this.
That particular book I wrote because the climate conventions were being derailed. The climate treaty is really to reduce the emissions caused by an industrial system based on fossil fuels and oil. And nobody was talking about food and agriculture. As I've written in this book, 40% of all greenhouse gas emissions come from an industrial model of farming, the kind Monsantos of the world want to promote, the kind that the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa wants to push. Carbon dioxide from fossil fuels, nitrogen oxides from chemical fertilizers, and methane from factory farms. Now, 40% of the disaster is coming from the same kind of agriculture that is displacing the peasantry, allowing the legitimacy of land grab in Africa, allowing the imposition of GMO seeds against the sovereign will of the people of Africa, destroying the water bodies and polluting them, and worse, at the end of the day, giving us all the health problems and the hunger and malnutrition problems. 1 billion people are hungry, 2 billion are suffering from diseases of obesity and diabetes. And like India, South Africa now is so badly hit by
Obesity.
obesity and type 2 diabetes, which is induced by a bad food system. It's not an oil-based system, a system in which instead of eating nourishment and food, we are eating oil, literally, is not good for the planet, it's not good for people. Yes, the oil interests are big, the genetic engineering interests are big, but I believe the life of the planet and the life of people and democracy are bigger.
Yes.
And that's why, to me, they look like dwarfs compared to this beautiful earth that we have to protect.
And I love that, and we're almost at the end. We've got basically a minute left. If you can quickly give us, a last piece of wisdom, so that the viewers can reflect on that.
But given that South Africa is a land of such diversity, both biological and cultural, it's a land where the anti-apartheid movement got rid of such a crazy idea of a rule based on treating diversity as a problem rather than a celebration. I do hope from South Africa we will see the birth of a new development model for the 21st century, where women, nature, the diversity of people, the children, the future are at the center.
Thank you very much, and that is very, very inspiring. So I want to once again thank you for being here and for sharing this with us. And we look forward to having you in South Africa more often, okay?
I hope
and
so.
share your wisdom, and we want to see seed banks, etc.
I
growing
hope so
here.
too. I hope that South Africa will be an organic country with lots of diversity.
I hope so too. We're facing many challenges. The corporates also dictate very many of our policies. But with that, we have to say, Fi amanillah, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and thank you for joining me.